Hi everyone, Crafty Crime here, and welcome back to my channel. So instead of doing Wrongful Conviction Wednesday as a short this week, I wanted to do a longer video about the case of Charles McCrory, who is currently incarcerated. His story has been coming up on my feeds a lot lately via the Innocence Project and other news outlets, so I wanted to share his current legal efforts as well as the dangers of forensic odontology, or bite mark evidence. Case Background. Charles McCrory was convicted in Andalusia, Alabama in 1985 for the homicide of his wife, Julie Bonds. McCrory was an information systems manager and volunteer firefighter. He was unable to reach Julie by phone that morning, and when she didn't show up at her mother's house to drop off their infant son, he headed home from work to check on her. They had recently separated after marriage struggles, but were still amicable as they worked out the legalities. On his way home, he heard the fire department call come in on his volunteer radio and let them know that he was en route. When McCrory entered their home, he found Bonds beaten to death and was immediately considered the prime suspect. Knowing he was innocent, he complied with police and investigators, even driving his own car down to the station for questioning. The district attorney did not have a strong case against McCrory, given that he was, innocent, so Bonds' family hired private attorney father-son duo Frank and Harvey Tipler to prosecute the case instead. Now, private prosecution isn't really a thing anymore in modern times, and it's outlawed in federal cases by the Supreme Court decision Leak versus Timmerman, but it's still a thing in Alabama state law. So now that the case was being privately prosecuted, the Tipler's key expert witness was Dr. Richard Soveron, a dentist who in this case was serving as a forensic odontologist. In Soveron's initial report, he stated that the two puncture marks found on Julie Bonds' arm were insufficiently distinct to allow for a positive match. He even stated that if the marks were the only evidence against McCrory, that his testimony would not be in the best interest of justice. But when it came to the trial, he didn't say any of that. When asked if the marks on her arm came from teeth, he said yes. And when asked, and I quote, "In your expert opinion, based on the evidence presented to you, were these teeth marks made by Charles McCrory?" He said yes, and that was it. McCrory was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. He has been incarcerated for the last 37 years. So, what went wrong? Actual innocence. People who are what we call actually innocent are at a higher risk of being wrongfully convicted. Now, there's a few reasons for this, but the main one relevant to this case is the idea that the truth will set you free. Let's take false confessions, for example. A lot of people in the general public have a hard time wrapping their heads around the idea that you would falsely confess or falsely plead guilty to something that they didn't actually do. I would never do that, they think. And I'm here to tell you that you would, particularly in the context of long, depriving interrogations where an officer is telling you that if you just sign this paper, you can go home. And if you're innocent, you might think that that signature might not actually matter because in the end, it'll all sort itself out and, well, the truth will set you free, right? And because people think that they would never do such a thing, confession evidence is very heavily weighted at trial, and it can sometimes lead to convictions with it being the only piece of evidence. Same idea goes for guilty pleas. It's harder for someone to appeal a conviction when they pled guilty because, again, why would someone plead guilty to something that they didn't actually do? Now, Charles McCrory held out. He was offered a plea deal, but refused to take it because he was innocent, and that backfired for him greatly. It was a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. Now, well over 90% of all cases end in guilty pleas, and they're so strongly pushed because we have such a massive carceral state that we just simply don't have enough resources to give everyone a trial, despite your Sixth Amendment right to a fair and speedy trial by a jury of your peers. I love how literally none of those factors, fair, speedy, or peers, are even true. So because he refused to plea out, the case went to trial and he was found guilty. And he was sentenced to life based solely on one piece of evidence: a bite mark. Forensic odontology. Now, some of you true crime junkies may know this, but forensic odontology really only became popular in the public eye after the case of Ted Bundy. Because it was one of the first nationally televised trials, and people were transfixed with Ted Bundy in general, the public was exposed to bite mark evidence linking him to one of his victims. And it's become a perpetuated myth in crime media that it's easy to match a bite mark, that all of our teeth are different, almost in the same way that people think about fingerprints. And guess who one of the dental experts on Ted Bundy's case was? None other than Dr. Richard Soveron. Now, I can't talk about any kind of forensic evidence without talking about the 2009 National Academy of Sciences report. Now, surprisingly, forensic odontology is actually one of the few regulated subfields of the forensic sciences, with the American Board of Forensic Odontology serving as a certification-granting entity. But that doesn't mean too much when your science is. Forensic odontology includes a few areas of focus, including the identification of unknown remains and the interpretation of oral injury. But the most common and the most controversial area is that of bite mark comparison. One big issue with this area is that there are no thorough studies examining the uniqueness of bite marks. There's no central repository of bite marks or patterns that exist for comparison purposes. Another big issue, as with almost all forensic sciences, is that of subjectivity. Testimony is based almost solely on the experience of the expert. Reforms that are now prevalent in other forensic sciences, such as blind identifications or using a second expert to confirm the match, are not widely used in this field. As of 2020, according to the Innocence Project, 26 people have been exonerated based on faulty bite mark evidence, and another 7 had been wrongfully indicted. Richard Soveron was the named expert in 2 of these cases, the wrongful conviction of Gary Cifazari and the wrongful indictment of Dale Morris Jr. Prosecutorial misconduct. Now, this is a bit more speculative, but the hiring of private prosecution definitely had an impact in this case, given that the DA didn't have much of a case against McCrory to begin with. But Harvey Tipler, the son half of the prosecution duo, is currently disbarred and in prison. He's serving a 30-year sentence for his efforts to get Florida Assistant State Attorney Russ Edwards basically assassinated? Well, okay, they were just plans. The guy is still alive, I'm pretty sure. Basically, Tipler got busted for racketeering, and while he was awaiting trial, he formed a plan with 2 other inmates and another disgraced attorney. Oh, and he's also serving time concurrently for 1 count of practicing law without a license. So I mean, the racketeering ring was busted in 2009, and he was sentenced in 2013. So it's unclear as to whether this behavior can be linked to McCrory's case at all, but yeah, that's just really something else. Where is the case now? So, in 2019, Richard Soveron recanted his testimony. In an affidavit, he said, and I quote, "While this testimony was understood by myself and others within my field as scientifically acceptable at the time of trial, I would not give it today. As a forensic odontologist, I no longer believe the individualized teeth marks comparison testimony I offered in his case was reliable or proper. I therefore renounce that testimony." Now that there was literally no evidence against McCrory, he petitioned for a new trial. Right before the evidentiary hearing in April 2021, he was actually offered a time-served plea deal. He could have walked free that same day, but McCrory turned it down again because he wasn't going to admit guilt for something that he didn't do. However, after waiting nearly a year for the court's opinion, they issued a decision in February 2022 that denied his petition. On March 1st, 2022, his attorneys filed a motion to reconsider based on the whole, no evidence thing, and that motion will be linked in the description if you'd like to read it. And that's where the case currently sits. His son Chad, who was an infant at the time of the homicide, fully supports his father's innocence, a father that he never got to know growing up. If you want to share information about McCrory's case, I'll put some links in the description, as well as all of the sources I used for this story. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like and subscribe, and please comment down below whether you'd prefer the shorts format or this longer format for Wrongful Conviction Wednesday. I will see you all in the next one. Bye!